Hey, it's Savannah Jones, and this is DMG's Bootstraps and Business, and I'm excited to talk to Gregg LeBlanc today. He's the marketing manager of Houston's, and I'm not sure where you've landed. You know, we're making our way through COVID, still not to the other side of it. And he's been through a lot of reinventions and transitions over the years, including e-commerce, hospitality, back to e-commerce through 9/11. So he's faced a lot of the challenges you might be facing today. So we're going to talk to him about some of the things that worked for him and some of the things that didn't. And hopefully we'll find some things that will work for you now. Gregg, thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
No problem. Glad to be here. Excited to be here.
So you and I did a little pre-chat just to touch base because we've known each other for a while.
We have.
I met you when you were in the hospitality world. And as we kind of discussed, you've been through a lot of transitions and reinventions, and we're going to get to all of that. But first, you're now in the Pacific Northwest, but you're from the East Coast. So how'd you make your way from there to here?
So I was offered an opportunity in sales from a brewing perspective to come out and sell Samuel Adams Brewery, their beers. And I moved out here sight unseen 27 years ago. And haven't looked back. So had to recalibrate from an East Coast pace to the laid back Northwest lifestyle. And a couple of children later, decided this is the right place that I want to be permanently.
Well, jumping into beer and microbreweries in the Pacific Northwest, that's a little bit of forecasting there because you were probably on the front end of that curve.
Actually, not only was on the front end of that side, so I started in sales. We actually started a subsidiary called Oregon Ale, where we had a flagship beer called IPA. And back in the day, we actually had to repackage that beer and call it India Pale Ale because people did not know what IPA stood for, believe it or not, back in that time period, the mid 90s.
So I know that you got here in the brewery field, which was, a good stomping ground, still is, even more so now. But you've made a lot of transitions, and that's kind of what I want to touch base on because, we've just come through 2020, early 21 now. Big change, big disruption in destruction as well in everybody's in everybody's life. I mean, everybody was touched by it. Nobody really escaped it in any way. But prior to that, we'll touch on the .com. I believe you were involved in the .com.
I was in the early days of the .com world. Yes.
So let's talk about that. Let's hear, because that might have some comparisons. Some of these changes and transitions you've been through are very similar to what we just went through in 2020. So let's start there.
Yeah, it's interesting because each transition, I like to think of each change that you make. It feels like the end of a mystery novel of a chapter or a paragraph or a chapter of it. And you're just left on the edge of your seat, not knowing where it's going to go. And fortunately, in my life, most of the next chapters start off and are great elements of where they go. But transition's a natural thing of how business happens in people's lives. The days of starting with a job and retiring with the same job, that's our parents. That's our parents' parents. That's not real world anymore. So I did the Oregon Ale thing for a while. Actually, I was very fortunate that I was both in charge of the recipes and the marketing. So that was a fun opportunity. And a few years into it, we were a wholly owned subsidiary, and Samuel Adams wanted to move the whole organization back to Boston. And that was not, I didn't feel it was the right thing to do for me personally and for our brand professionally. I like to jokingly say, I think the last thing we want to do is have someone that was selling Oregon Ale describe it as Oregon Ale and not be able to, put it there. So I transitioned off of that and decided what I wanted to do. Had a very fortunate situation that with my outplacement agreement, I actually went to a company that helped me figure out how to network and how to rewrite a resume and how to interview. And it was a great time to learn those elements. And within a short period of time, I ended up going to Hollywood Video. And that was at the height of the video craze as DVDs started rolling. So it seems like many times, I guess, I get into cutting edge and then those industries maybe recalibrate and have to figure out how they work out. And there's always victims left behind, companies, organizations. So the video world, as we know, doesn't exist anymore except for one video store in the country in Bend, one Blockbuster. That was Hollywood Video. and then left there and did a year for a .com called Handyman Online. And that was back in the day, the early, late 90s, early 2000s, where things were measured in eyeballs. How many people visited your site? It had nothing to do with sales, had nothing to do with potential. It had to do with traffic to your website. And then the correctioning happened of the .com industry, that businesses needed to do business. Funny concept that needed to happen. So our company went out, as many did. I actually distinctly remember flying to Tampa, Florida, and having to close down an office and let people go. And I think I was one of the last 10 members of that company. Transitioned to figure out what was next. Here's the .com falling apart. The industry's, challenging. And then 9/11 happens, and I'm out of work. So I have to figure out what to do. And anybody that was out of work or working at 9/11 or around then knows that the world shut down. Now, not quite the same shutdown that we have for COVID, because this is a prolonged shutdown. But that still was a point that people weren't returning your telephone calls. People weren't networking. People were hunkering at home. Comfort food was in. People needed to figure out whether the bridges they crossed were next to go. And I distinctly remember, I looked it up recently. I interviewed with McCormick and Schmick's for a director of marketing job. I think it was July 8th. And I actually was offered the job on January 5th. So that was, and 9/11 obviously happened in September.
Right.
So the industry, the whole hospitality industry had shut down as well. Travel wasn't happening. People weren't going out as often. So I learned patience at that point of just figuring out good things will happen. You just need to be disciplined, need to continue to dot your I's and cross your T's, network where you can, figure out what you want to be when you grow up, figure out what you've accomplished and where you want to go. And the common thread through each of my transitions is I didn't know what the next job was, but I was fortunate that I was able to take my experiences from where I was to where I went and transition them and use those experiences. So just kind of rounding that path out, left McCormick and Schmick's shortly before they were purchased by Landry's out of Texas and eventually shut down. At that point, we had 5 girls in our blended family, so they were all teenagers. I survived. That probably was the hardest transition of all, of having all 5 of them teenagers for 1 year, one common year that the last one hit 13 and the other one was still 19. But I ran my own consulting practice for 4 years. It was important for my wife and I to make sure that we had dinner on the table and ate like a family before we took one of our 5 girls to volleyball practice, and all 5 played volleyball. So that was time management, by the way. So that was another important skill that you take with you on your 9-to-5 world and your job out there is managing all 5 of our girls playing volleyball at one time. So I did that for 5 years, 4 years, 5 years. Still in the hospitality industry, had a lot of fun, worked with Ringside Steakhouse. At that point, they opened Ringside Fish House. I was involved in that, moved back to Ringside Steakhouse and after the remodel, and really figuring out what I wanted to be in the latter phases of my professional life. I realized I had only done that brief stint in e-commerce, and I needed to sharpen that saw. I needed to go out and learn more about e-commerce. So I had an opportunity. I had a 90-day, 3-month contract gig with an e-commerce company that turned into 5 years. And
that's a good gig.
that was a good short-term deal.
So let's stop there for just 1 second, because back to where you don't know where your next job is going to come from. And then, again, you're on the front end of the gig thing, because like you said, we're not our parents. Nobody gets into one position and stays. So you've made some big transitions, but let's touch on that one, because you go in saying short stint. And how does a short stint turn into 5 years?
So the fun part of that job is I remember sitting with the owner, and I said at the end of the interview, and again, this was just for a contract job, I said, is there anything here that would keep me from being hired? Which I think is an important question to ask at the end of any interview. And the owner looks at me and he says, well, you're a restaurant guy. I'm looking for an e-commerce guy. And I actually audibly laugh out loud. And he says to me, "Why are you laughing?" And I said, "Because 9 years ago, I'm sitting in an interview with Bill McCormick and Doug Schmick, and I asked this very same question. And I said, is there anything that would keep me from being hired?" And they turn and look at each other, and Doug Schmick looks at me and says, "Well, you're not a restaurant guy. You're a general marketer." And it's funny how you can be pigeonholed if you allow yourself to be pigeonholed, but if you find out how to get out of that and how to transition. And the fun part of that question is I looked at the owner of the company. I said, what I am is a career marketer. And I'm someone who can learn quickly about what the playing field is and how to apply principles A, B, and C and make them work and learn about how to get them to work for company X, Y, Z. That's what I've done in my career. So I either could have hit that roadblock and stopped, or hit the wall and turn to the right and realize there's a door to the right or a door to the left, or heck, there may even be a window to the right that you can climb through. But just asking the question and then answering the question honestly, because that's who I am. I'm a marketer. The playing field that you play on changes in whatever we do, whatever we sell, whoever we sell to, whether we're B2B or B2C, whether we're using e-commerce, whether we're using hospitality. Most of those major principles remain the same. It's just trying to figure out what's the same and what's different.
Right. And how you can fit yourself into that picture and continue to learn and grow and apply what you know and learn new things and apply those.
So 90 days into it, the owner's happy with what I've been brought in to fix, which is mostly management things. But he's comfortable with what I'm doing from the e-commerce side. And because I'm not treating it like it's a 180 and I'm a deer in the headlights, and I'm just digging in and just approaching as if it's a full-time job. Within 60 to 90 days after that, we have an opportunity that he offers me an opportunity to join the company. And I transition in with them for 5 years and oversee all of their marketing and the website and all of our e-commerce practices and continue to learn as it was. I had not done SEO or SEM prior to that step of things. Certainly user experience was something that I had done, but it hadn't been referred to as UX at that point. It was just what's the best approach that we want to do for our customers. So just because the terminology is different, the principles and the practices aren't any different than what we've done in our career many times. And
then after the 5 years?
So I reached the end of 2019. There's a right point for transition in my career. Getting ready to head to a family wedding on the East Coast. It's right around Thanksgiving. I said, you know what? Let's take about a month and a half off and just regroup, figure out what's next. So then we get into the start of 2020, still looking. And needless to say, something happened in the world within spring of 2020 that left me on the sidelines for a little while and had to figure out, a little longer to figure out what I was going to be when I grew up.
So is that the longest, that you've ever been looking for the next opportunity? And this is an odd time because the opportunities disappeared. Like there were in your transitions and as you've made your way through different environments and different companies. Cool. There's opportunity. And for the first time, guess what? No.
Yeah, it's funny. Again, I think I had the roots of 9/11 there as a foundation. So that was comforting to me. And I really try to be optimistic in everything I do. I try to live in a life. My glass is 3/4 full. It's always more than half full. It's 3/4 full. So I kept thinking we were going to round the next corner. It was going to come. But it wasn't just the jobs. It was networking. No, you don't meet strangers for coffee when you're in a pandemic, and the people that you're meeting too are out of work or figuring out what they are going to do or how they're going to do business. So to answer your question, 13 months surely is the longest that I had been out of work. But I remain confident that I would keep looking every day. I'm not going to tell you it was 8 hours a day because it's just not real world. I think it was also important to have a good work-life balance. So I stayed focused. I'm a runner, as you know, and I got up and ran every morning just like I did. Now, I'll be honest, I get up at 4:30 every day now. I was not getting up at 4:30 during the pandemic, but I was getting up at 5:30. I was maintaining a schedule to be focused. Maybe I was taking longer lunch breaks to do things a little bit longer, but I looked for a job every day. I also tried to realize in transitions that the transition calendar doesn't know what life is. So someone can tell you that no one's going to hire in the holidays, and once Thanksgiving happens, it's not going to happen. And that was part of my original mindset of waiting till after the holidays. But I was offered a job and started here December 21st. So I was offered the job. The recruiter called me the week before Thanksgiving, and I went through 2 rounds of interviews, not counting the recruiter. So 3 rounds of interviews, and was hired and started December 21st. So it's also a testament to just do what you're going to do and do the work and put your head down. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But if you stop looking, you're not going to have that opportunity. It's the same thing as our jobs. If we stop doing what we're doing, the work's not going to get done. So yeah, 13 months was the longest I had ever imagined. They were not easy months, but you just have to do it. And I look back at it now, and I'm knee deep, and I'm hitting the ground running, and I'm 70 days into this, but having a great time, and use that time to refresh myself too.
So let's talk about those transitions between .com, hospitality, e-commerce, back to e-commerce. What has stayed the same in regards to just those challenges, and when you come to the fork in the road, the right or the left, or you go over? I mean, what has been very consistently working for you? And then let's talk about some of the challenges that were like, boy, I wish I would have seen that coming.
So I'll talk about the challenges of getting to each job, and then maybe talk about the challenges of being in each job. So the getting to each job is finding ways to make my past experiences fit the opportunities that I'm looking at. You can often say to yourself, I could have resolved that I wasn't going to find an e-commerce job because I didn't have that experience. Or we're in B2B now, and I haven't done B2B. My current position is B2B, and I haven't done B2B except for small parts of it. So I could have immediately written that opportunity right off. But instead, I try to find the commonalities of what I've done and how I can use those experiences to transition and try to communicate that in the interview process. So I mentioned kind of the last question I ask in an interview is there anything you've heard today that would keep me from being hired? The first question I ask in an interview is, so I have whatever experience on my resume, we passed the cover letter phase. What is it about my experience that brought me in today? And what I find that does is it recalibrates the conversation so that they tell you what they found interesting. And that begins the fork in the road that you talked about. That decides what road I go down, right? So if they say, well, you've had tremendous, in this job, you've had experience within the hospitality field, so we don't have to teach you how restaurants work, how distribution works. You've done some of that. So that part's not something we need to retrain you on. So now I know what they like, and I can continue down that part of the conversation instead of thinking or hoping what I think they might like, and anticipate what might be there. Instead I get to focus on what they are interested in and build off that. And so that's the transition, is figuring out those common practices.
Well, that's a great tip. Skills. Because, and sorry to step on you there, but that's a great tip in order to, land the interview and then get in front of somebody to be able to actually address what they are looking for and what their concerns are, opposed to just running down the resume.
Yeah, and the same thing obviously is true through the cover letter. And that's the hardest blind dating, that's the ultimate match.com. Is you have to write 50 cover letters and hope that one person picks up that stack of paper and yours gets pulled out and they decide to go from there, because your competition's writing great cover letters and has great experience too. So it's not, I don't want to make anybody think it's easy, because it's not. Anybody that's in this transition knows it's not. It is a discipline, and it is work, and it is a lot of failure. before you have success. So it is a mindset of taking that challenge on regularly and just picking yourself back up by the bootstraps, dusting off and saying, today's a new day. I'm going to take it on. What do I got? And that's no different than someone working, right? In your current role, in the roles that we've all had, we all have bad days. There's going to be something that goes wrong, and it's how we pick it back up again and say, tomorrow's a new day. Let me figure out how this next project's going to work. So it's the same mindset that we have 9 to 5. Might even be the same mindset that we have at home when something goes wrong with our significant other, with our family members, with our neighbor, and we can either dwell on it or just move on. So we've got to figure out how that transition happens.
So how did you work through challenges with each of those new positions and industries?
So for me, the commonality that I try to do as a marketer is, and I guess I'm going to take a step backwards. I started in marketing, but I went into sales for a period of time, and I went back into marketing. And what was really important to me then is realizing that sales is what drives the bus. That's where the rubber meets the road. And I had some great sales training that one of the phrases that someone taught me was, whose world are you in? And understanding the person you're speaking to and what's important to them and speaking their language. So if they're analytical, you don't want to talk about a descriptive floral presentation with all these flourishes about things. All they care about is numbers. So my job is to speak their language, not to get them to speak mine. That's learning that from selling. So the same thing's true in marketing. Up on my whiteboard, every job I've made is whose world are you in? So it's understanding who's our customer, distilling that down to who's our prime customer. In radio, in your past life, it was referred to as P1. Who's your prime customer? In the Pareto principle, it's the 80-20 rule. What 20% of your customers do 80% of your business? You can't be everything to everyone. So you have to figure out how to resonate with that prime customer, who they are and what's important to them. And if you can do detailed persona work and understand that from a technical aspect, great. But with enough experience, enough questions, and enough thought about things, you can pretty much figure out who it is by asking questions. So it's getting in there, settling in, asking a lot of questions, and learning in that transition period as opposed to thinking I have all the answers from day one.
So let's talk about your position now, where you are, and 70 days in, what it looked like 70 days ago, and what does it look like today?
You know, it's not dramatically different. When I came in, my mindset is to have really a short game, a mid game, and a long game. What's my short-term plan? What do I need to get accomplished to figure this out and to learn? And part of that process needs to be learning. So I report to the president of the company. We really worked on a 90-day plan of the things that I need to accomplish in those 90 days. And one of them that we discussed, and as much she was on board on, is learn who the people are that we work with, learn what we all do, and learn marketing's contribution to those roles. That's something that you don't often do. We all kind of start a job with vim and vigor, and we're just going to take on the world and we're going to change the world. The reality is that we're driving an ocean liner. We're not driving a speedboat. And as much as we think we're driving that speedboat and we can turn quickly, we're better to jump on that ocean liner and see where it's going to take us and begin to make changes, course corrections on what it is. So that's the short term, is not tackling major things, because the things that we thought were problems and opportunities in week 2, either they weren't that big, or they're bigger than need to be addressed in 90 days, or there's a lot more low-hanging fruit that can be affected and can drive sales and drive our business quicker. And we also learn the language and who we're addressing and how we're addressing them and where everything lies out in that period. We're going to know a lot more in 6 weeks than we're going to know in 2 weeks. So then I have a 90-day plan. I have the balance of 2021, and I'm beginning to build a whiteboard over my shoulder that's going to have 2022 and beyond. And the reality for all of us is we're not going to return to what 2020 was, or more importantly, what 2019 was. For me, being here is I don't have a reference of what 2019 was and 2018 was, other than some reports and some analytics. But the 2021 plan is still that hybrid of 2020 of how COVID impacted our business. So that's where the mid-range goal is figuring out what business is going to be like as we exit the pandemic, and then really figuring out a longer-term plan of post-pandemic life. So it's really 3 plans that I'm building: the short, quick juggle of what we're doing, the longer plan of kind of looking at our GPS of where we want to go, and then long-term planning of a full trip of where the adventure is going to take us.
So let's talk a little bit about adversity and how people can kind of, from your perspective and what's worked for you, get through these changes now, because like you said, it's not 2019 and it's not 2020, and we have no idea what 2021 is going to bring, or 2022 at this stage of the game either. So for people, because you've been through a lot of reinvention, a lot of transition, and again, rode that wave at the beginning of the .com and the 9/11 and hospitality and consolidation and just really, I mean, like one of the an original gig worker, what's standard today was not standard, and
Right.
to be kind of that adventurous and be that open and flexible, which some people are not, and change is really hard. But guess what? Everybody's kind of went through a change. So what can you, from your experience, give those people that are sitting there right now that have never done that and never thought they'd ever do that? And guess what? There's no job available in their industry. So they've got to jump industries.
Right. And the hardest thing is it's harder to reinvent yourself. It's harder to change your perspective. So if someone is a person who does not embrace change, that's going to be hard. That's a lot harder than either one of us giving someone coaching about where to go. So that's a that's addressing that within their own self, of realizing that change is inevitable. So how to figure out how to best address those things. And it can be longer term. Some people need to process that change. It's figuring out how they have to process it themselves and realize that change is inevitable. I think a good way to do it is I'm going to quote I worked for the Gallo Winery years ago too, and Gallo's known for their sort of like Procter & Gamble back in the day, white shirts and staunch ties and suits. And I'll never forget, a gentleman stood in front of us in a sales meeting. We're all Glengarry Glen Ross, was wanting to be salespeople to win the steak knives and not lose our job, and we just wanted to be focused. And he stood in front and he goes, "Okay, you need to plan your work and work your plan." And we're all like, "Yes!" And we're ready to storm the castle. And he looks at us dead in the eye and he goes, "That's bullshit." And we all stopped cold. Why is that? A guy from Gallo, from Modesto, just swore. And he says, "That's not reality. Reality is you need to plan your work. You need to rework your plan, and you need to work your reworked plan." And that's stuck with me for almost 30 years now. That's the nature of what we're all going through in transition, is have a plan. And it doesn't mean you throw away every plan, but you have to be comfortable that at some point you have to be comfortable to rework it if it's not there, and be comfortable to work that reworked plan. And that mindset has been with me for a long time. So plan your work, and hopefully it goes seamlessly. And then if it doesn't, be comfortable to head down that road. It's also not being so unstructured and so unplanned that you're living in a panic and in crisis. One of my partners used to love the adrenaline rush of doing everything. And I used to joke that he had a different approach of being a fireman. I look at it as a marketer, and my job of being a fireman in the sense of fire prevention, of thinking through what the challenges are going to be and how I want to address them before they become a problem. In hindsight, I realized that he was really a pyromaniac. He liked the adrenaline. He liked walking into the fire. So that's part of the yin and the yang of our partnership. When we ran our brewery, we had different approaches, and it worked for us together. But if you're someone that can't deal with change, or someone that thrives on panic, to me, those are things that are hard. So it's how to be grounded to look at them. But then it's to look at the job or the opportunity and say, what do I have in common with that? Read the job description and say, what can I do? I had a friend once that had worked for a newspaper in circulation and sales. and he was trying to figure out an opportunity, and it ended up being business development. And he wasn't sure how to address that opportunity. And I looked at him, I said, what do you think business development is? It's a direct overlap of sales. You have that experience. All you need to do now is communicate that same opportunity of what that overlap is. And they are not 100% the same. The business development people that are watching this podcast have just sent a shiver up their spine. They are very different of where you are in business development sales, but there's enough of an overlap and an understanding of those two worlds to figure out where the transition is. So it's figuring out what the overlap of what you've done with what the job is, and then learning what you need to do to accomplish that. So that's the focus that I think in a transition someone should look forward to and try to seek out that common ground.
And before we wrap it up, let's talk about networking, because it's such a huge part of growth, opportunity, and we don't have that for all intents and purposes on the level that we had it before. I mean, it's coming back, and we figured out Zoom, and we figured out this type of interaction, but what it was and what it needs to be, there's a big divide right now. So how have you managed it, and what have you seen that really does work?
That was the hardest part for me. I'll be honest. That was the real challenge, because I am a people person. I am let's have a cup of coffee, let's sit down, let's spend 25 minutes and talk about what you're trying to want to be. And networking is also something that maybe I'll front load it on the other half of the situation is those of us that have a position, have a job, have an opportunity, have to remember that you can't just ask for time to network with someone when you're looking for work. So it's important for those of us that have that foundation to make sure that we find the effort to network with the people that are also going through a transition, because it's going to be us one day, and you can't just raise your hand when you want something. That's the golden rule, right? My freelance company was called Marketing Karma, because what you put in is what you get out. And that's a mindset that I try to have. So to me, it's like Stephen Covey talked about the emotional bank account, or the bank account that went out there, is I had done a lot of networking proactively before the pandemic happened. So I had a strong network of people that I could reach out to via email or phone call and say, hey, I'm looking at this opportunity. Do you know anybody there? It's a little more pointed. You don't have time to have a 20-minute cup of coffee and have that roundabout catch up. You have to it's like an elevator pitch. You have to catch up on a phone, ask for a phone call, catch up on a phone call, and then cut to the chase fairly quickly to say, well, I'm looking at this company, and it looks like through LinkedIn, you know someone that knows someone there. How well do you know someone that's there? Do you think you can help with an introduction? Because ultimately, as we talked about with that cover letter game, that Match.com approach is, in life, there's 50 resumes on that 100 resumes on that HR manager's desk. You have to find some way to have that person have your resume pulled out, and hopefully it's someone that knows someone. So that's the hardest part of the post-pandemic, is how to have that cup of coffee, but you just have to find different ways to do it. What's also important to me in everything I did before then, even now, is actually taking the time and writing physical thank you notes. Writing a note to someone after it's over with, and that's a point of difference, because we all get focused on emails. And again, in whose world are we in? We're writing an email to thank someone for their time, and we think we've written this glorious email. But now, in whose world are we in? We've all been the recipient of that email. We've glanced at the email because it's coming in a busy part of the day. And how long does it take us to delete that email? Let's be real, not that long. If you're getting beyond 30 minutes of reading it, 30 seconds of reading someone's email, that's beginning to be a stretch. So why do we think the person receiving our emails beyond 30 seconds too? Take a moment, write a thank you card, and send it off to someone's address. And I don't sweat the small stuff of, well, I don't know if that person's working remotely, or if they're working for their company, and they may be working out of their home office in Beaverton versus their company office in Hillsborough. You know what? That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it, because someone else is forwarding their mail from that office in Hillsborough to them. They're going in once every 2 weeks to get it. We just have to change our mindset to figure out how can it happen, and not why won't it happen, and then just figuring out how to do it. But when we receive that thank you note from someone that sends a thank you note, physical card in the mail to us, how do we feel? We feel pretty good. Why don't we think that someone else is going to feel good too? So it's finding ways to work around the system in networking. It's very similar to sales, that people send us blind copies or blind emails and just send them out there to try to get things done. Imagine if you really want time with someone and you sent them a $3 or $4 or $5 gift card for Starbucks, a note in advance, and said, hey, I'm hoping to buy you a cup of coffee. I know we can't do it right now, but I'd love to be able to pick your brain for 5 minutes about an opportunity that I'm faced with. If you receive that card with a $5 gift card in the mail, and I'm saying you have to put a bit of a filter to it, you're not doing it blindly, I got to think that person's going to give you 5 minutes. And you would have spent that for a cup of coffee anyway. So it's being solution-oriented, brainstorming, being quick and thinking it through and thinking like the other person, and just taking that transition by storm and saying, it's going to happen. Let's figure out how we're going to do it. And we're going to be a part of that solution.
And hopefully we're a lot closer to face-to-faces. I mean, we're heading in that direction, but fingers and toes crossed, we're a lot closer than
heading in that
that, right?
Yeah, the reality, that's the other thing about planning. You're talking about planning. I think we all have to be real to think in our current job, right? That was the networking part of it, is we can't think that the pandemic's going to end in 3 months and have our exit plan. We've got to be real to say, okay, we have to think what's going to happen when we get out, and what's going to happen in that long stretch that it's going to take to do that, and not be pie in the sky and be overly optimistic. And again, I'm an optimistic person, but when it comes to the plan of when we get out of this, I try to be realistic so that I don't have to keep reworking my plan. And guess what? Reworking my plan. I never feel like I'm doing that plan. So we have to be real. We have to not drink the Kool-Aid and totally just focus on what's going to get us out of it and what's that right time frame.
Well, thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I'm more than happy to be here. I am a survivor, so that's really what it comes down to, is figuring out how to take the next challenge. I guess lastly, what I'll throw in there too is, when you're going through a transition, it's much like coming to a job and your boss says, how about if we ask you to do this? I caution people not to get bogged down with what the position is, what the title is, and even quasi what the pay is, because of a couple of things. Right now, a pay of a job is more than unemployment. What you get into for a title does not mean that's what you're going to be 2, 3, 4 years from now. What's more important than a title is where you're working, who you're working with, and the contribution you're making. And if you're happy and you're satisfied, that's going to be more important than what's printed on a business card. So it's being open to all of those things, and good things will happen with the right energy.
Yeah, I love that. Good things happen to people who show up.
Yeah, for sure. Savannah, this has been fun. So more than happy to be here.
Well, thank you, and have a great afternoon. And, maybe we can do this again another time, because I know you're a wealth of information and knowledge and experience. So maybe we can touch on some other topics next time.
More than happy to. More than happy to come back. More than happy to share what to do and share what not to do, because I've done my share of those as well.
Well, maybe that's what we'll talk about next time, all the what nots to do.
I got a few of those.
Thank you, Greg.
No problem. Have a great day, Savannah.
All right, you too. Well, there's some solid sage advice if you're making a transition or going through a change right now. Thanks to Greg. If you'd like to find out more about Greg, I'll go ahead and put his contact information in the show notes. You can also find out more about DMG or these podcasts. And if you have a topic you'd like me to discuss or a guest you'd like me to chat with, just let us know. And if you get a chance, subscribe. And thank you, as always, for checking us out. I appreciate it.